Welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm Rafael Carmona from the AAA ICDR. And before we begin, I just want to remind you that you can join our Young Practitioners Group, ICDR Young and International, or ICDR Y&I. If you Google us, ICDR Young and International, you will find our website where you will find registration forms in English and in Spanish, as well as all of the recorded webinars that we've organized. We also have a LinkedIn group. It's also called ICDR Young and International. So you can request to join there, and we will be posting there all of our updates. I also want to take a moment to thank, of course, all of the attendees, all the panelists, the co-organizer, the Moot Alumni Association, as well as Shashi Delandas for leading the charge in organizing this event. And so with that, you haven't joined to see me talk, so I give the floor to the moderators. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rafael. Hi, my name is Malte Stübinger, and together with Tess, the two of us have the honor of being hosts for this panel. We will have a bit of a hybrid role between host and panelist, and make sure to also share our individual stories and impressions with you. Also because unfortunately, Isabella can't make it today because she is stuck in German traffic where we have a strike, and that has laid cross with her travel plans. So unfortunately, she can't make it today, but we still have a wonderfully amazing, diverse panel of participants here who have agreed to talk to us today about their career in dispute resolution and arbitration, and how being LGBTQ has had an impact on that. And I'm really looking forward to that. So first we have Marco de Sousa here from Herbert Smith Freehills. Marco is a senior associate in the firm's arbitration department. He's currently based in London. He has been a member of the firm's LGBT+ network IRIS, and conducts pro bono work for legal clinics in the LGBT+ sector, and also mentors younger members of the firm, younger associates. In his legal practice, he acts as counsel and advocate in international commercial arbitration cases, commercial and investment arbitration alike. He also works on matters that include questions of public international law and business and human rights. Before moving to London, he has been active in the Herbert Smith Dubai and Abu Dhabi offices, and also spent a whole 3 years in the Hong Kong office before then relocating to London. Thank you for being here, Marco.
Then we have also Abbey Hudson. Abbey got her law degree from Columbia University, where she was also the president of the Outlaws LGBT organization. She's currently a partner at Gibson Dunn in the Los Angeles office, where she focuses on environmental matters and complex trial litigation. Now, we know it was being in arbitration, but given Ms. Hudson's profile, we nonetheless deemed it appropriate to ask her here. Amongst the activities that she is involved with within the firm is that she's a member of the firm's Associates Diversity, Wellbeing and Community Affairs Committee. She helped launch and run the Gibson Dunn's LGBT Women's Initiative, and she was named one of the best 40 LGBT lawyers under 40 by the National LGBT Bar Association in 2017. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about her experience during the conversation.
Very good. And then third one, we have Mikkel Mergener. Mikkel is a non-binary lawyer that has been called the first transgender person in the Brazilian arbitration community. They act as a diversity and inclusion consultant in their own consultancy firm, but are also active as a counsel for the Young Arbitrators Committee of the Brazilian Center for Mediation and Arbitration. Mikkel has before worked in the dispute resolutions team of different top-tier Brazilian law firms, and nowadays focuses on helping the legal sector become more diverse and inclusive to all kinds of people. It's a beautiful mission. Thank you for being here, Mikkel.
As to myself, my name is Tess. I currently work as a research fellow in the Max Planck Institute in Luxembourg. And before that, I studied in the Netherlands, in Nijmegen, where I also participated in the Vis Moot, after which I ended up in a law firm, the arbitration department of a law firm, the Brouw Blackstone Westbroek in the Netherlands, where I also did most of my transition. I identify as transgender as well as bisexual. And that's also one of the reasons for me to push for this panel together with Malte, together with the other people involved in the Moot Alumni Association D&I committee, because we feel that this is one of the things that is less spoken about, but nonetheless prevalent and should be out there more in the open, pretty much like the panelists involved in this discussion.
Yeah, and lastly, a few words on myself. My name is Malte Stübinger. I am currently General Counsel Germany with the litigation finance company Domino Litigation Services. Been in that role for the last 2 years. Before that, I was a litigation and arbitration associate here with Latham & Watkins in Hamburg, Germany. Bred and educated in Hamburg and the northern region, also a Vis Mootee from 15 years ago. This year we're celebrating 30. I was in the 15th Moot and it kind of never completely let go. I can't make it to Vienna this year, unfortunately. That's why I'm very happy to at least be part of a Moot close panel here. Okay, and I identify as gay. I'm married and have a 3-year-old daughter.
Now, before we start with the actual panel discussion, we would like to point out that we've actively searched also for people identifying as LGBT in, amongst others, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. It was very difficult. We were not able to find someone who was willing to speak about it on camera. Keep in mind that this conversation is being recorded, but it's nonetheless an issue that we felt that we needed to address. It's not like we didn't do anything about it, but we also understand that there are certain difficulties involved. So without further ado, let's start the discussion. And first, being and finding yourself. Most of us.
Maybe, sorry, Tess, but one final point that was, if people have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A section down below. We'll make sure to look at them and read them out to the panelists. But please do feel free to drop them in there anytime. Sorry.
No, actually, thank you very much for the clarification, Malte. I completely forgot. So with respect to being and finding yourself, one of the things that we all have in common is that at a certain point, we had to come out for our identity, tell it to people around us. Can you tell a bit more about how this process was for you? How was your coming out? Was it also at work? What kind of responses did you get from colleagues? Marco, your thoughts.
Thanks, Tess, and thank you to you both for those lovely introductions. It's great to be here with everyone today. So I thankfully had quite a happy coming out experience. I came out, I suppose, relatively late. I identify as I am a cisgender gay man. I came out in my late 20s when I was a junior associate out in Hong Kong. And I had grown up in South Africa in a very progressive and open-minded family, with the benefit of South Africa being a progressive and open-minded community by and large, but did not feel comfortable coming out when I was in South Africa, or indeed in my university years or early years of my practice in London. And it took moving to a new city in Hong Kong to feel like I had a clean slate and to give me the courage to do that. But what was also hugely instrumental in my decision to come out, both personally and professionally, was that in my 3 years in Hong Kong, I had the great privilege of working with very senior mentors who were themselves out gay people, including our CEO, Justin D'Agostino, who is a very high-profile member of the Hong Kong arbitration community, and really, wears his sexuality as a real strength. He is out and proud. He is charismatic and flamboyant and hugely successful in that market. And it sort of made me think, Well, great. Maybe I can be that too, and maybe, you know, being who I am is not actually an impediment to my career, but is something that could really push me along and be a real strength. So I came out first to friends and family, and then very slowly and very naturally came out to people at work, and it was universally supportive in the reaction, I would say. And it has since really helped me to sort of build my practice and to build my internal and external network. So it's a happy story from me.
What about you, Abby? Have you had a similar happy experience in your coming out?
Yeah, I think I would call it happy. I mean, I'm certainly happy to be gay, right? I identify as a cisgender, white, privileged lesbian. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, which is kind of a rural area of the United States. And so I didn't know any gay people. I take that back. There was one kid in my high school that identified as a gay man. And of course, we ended up dating, right? As many of us do. But then I, you know, was dating men for quite a while and happy with that. But I think it was because I didn't really know or recognize that there was an alternative. And then my senior year in college, actually a law student at the time was like, no, you know what? I think you really enjoy kissing other girls. And he plied me with some liquor. And in fact, I do enjoy kissing other girls. And so it was a happy story. And the first person that I came out to was my college roommate, and she was fantastic and supportive. When I told my parents, I remember them saying to me, "That's nice. Guess what the cat did?" So it was almost a non-issue for them as well, which I know is a extreme place of privilege to be in, and not an experience that everyone has. But in terms of my professional career, I think I really had a benefit, again, that not everyone experiences, which is I came into my career as an out lesbian. And so when people met me, I looked like this. And there are some stereotypes and some assumptions, but not many people asked me about my boyfriend. And in fact, you know, almost immediately, I was introducing people to my girlfriend at the time. And so it wasn't a process where I continually had to reintroduce myself and explain myself. It was almost understood, which was really great for me and allowed me to build a real community at my law firm of people that were also gay and open about it and excited about it. And you know, it's nice to live in progressive Los Angeles in the United States, which certainly isn't the experience that everyone is having in the United States right now, but for me, a happy story.
Abby, if I may shortly follow up on that, at the time when you were starting with Gibson, were there like out role models around that you knew about, so that did this give you a layer of security that everything was going to be fine with you being out, or was it so much that it was obvious that it wouldn't be a problem that you felt comfortable in it? Or how did the firm give you that feeling of safety?
There was two really good things that contributed to that for me. First, when I was interviewing for a summer position with the firm, I met a mentor who, this was, 2008, and he was every single gay stereotype you could think of, right? He showed up to lunch with a sequined Von Dutch hat on backwards, the short shorts. He was living his authentic, true life, and he was thriving at the firm. And he was looking at me as a young person who was scared and really didn't know what to do, and saying, you can come here and you can be accepted, and you're not going to have to hide who you are, which was fantastic. So I had that as a point of reference. And the second point of reference, which was serendipitous, but just kind of an amazing thing that really has impacted my entire career, is when I was studying for the bar before I came to the firm, which was going to be November of 2009, our firm filed on behalf of the plaintiffs a lawsuit challenging Proposition 8 in California, which was the law that stripped gay and lesbians the right to marry. So we were on the right side of that issue. We were representing the plaintiffs, and it was coming from the very, very, very top of my firm, from a guy named Tedelson, who is a conservative, a very, very conservative lawyer in our DC office. But he was on the right side of this issue and has since become a good friend of mine and a mentor as well. But again, I feel like I've had such an easy road, because who could have predicted that? I couldn't have predicted that, but I just walked into this situation where all signs were pointing to me being validated and accepted and celebrated for who I was.
So turning to you, Mikkel, how has your experience been? It's what we talked about in the previous discussion. It's quite colorful.
Well, firstly, I like to thank everyone in organizing this event and all the panelists, everyone here. It is an honor not only to be representing the Brazilian arbitration community, but also the Brazilian transgender community. And I think it is important to stress out that Brazil, until this day, is the country that most kills transgender people in the world. So in terms of numbers, we have this dark mark, the sad mark, I wouldn't say dark, but the sad mark about our country. So it's very important to talk about being transgender in Brazil. And I am also a white privileged person. So I think that in many ways, my coming out process was very similar to Marco's and Abbey's, but I had a lot of difficulties when it came to gender transition. So I came out a number of times. When I was 19, I came out as a bisexual woman. When I was 20, I came out as a lesbian, and I was like full lesbian for 3 years. And then when I was 23, I came out as non-binary and pansexual. And I decided to have a physical gender transition with testosterone and everything. So life got a little bit more challenging after that. When I changed sexualities, people supported me a lot, and it wasn't that hard because people kind of already knew that I was gay somehow. So, oh, okay, you're bisexual, you're a lesbian, all right. But when I came out as transgender, a few people said that they already thought that I was going to come out, but a few people were like, oh my God, wait, what does that mean? How do we proceed from now on? So it was hard changing names, pronouns, and changing my body. But I have to say that I had support in my work environments in general. And my biggest difficulty was actually learning to accept myself. It was not so hard to deal with others because of my privileges. I think that brown and black transgender people go through a lot more difficulties than white trans people, but I grew up in a conservative small town as well in Brazil, and I also had to move to a big city, which was Rio de Janeiro, in order to find myself really. And when I found myself, I got scared. I got really scared for being trans, and I had to learn how to love myself, how to protect myself. And nowadays I have a good time with that. I think that happiness is priceless. So be patient and follow your heart when it comes to coming out. Take your time.
To follow
That is
on
nicely
that was asked in the chat, Mikkel, how long was it approximately ago that you came out?
Well, I came out as non-binary with 23. I'm going to turn 27 now, so it was like 4 years ago, and I'm in 3 years of testosterone. And I was a very public person before my transition, so you can find my old selves in the internet, and I'm very open about it. So check it out if you want.
This
And
question
then,
has also been specifically asked with a view to Abbey, with the specific reference. Was it in Abbey's case before Lawrence? I assume that refers to a case.
yeah, Lawrence v. Texas, 2003.
Yeah,
was
so I remember 2003 is when I graduated from college. So that was the year that I was coming out, and you know, the law student that helped me figure that out was actually actively involved in some legal civil disobedience around the Lawrence outcome, which obviously came out on the right side, thankfully. But they had prepared a whole bunch of protests and were ready to go. So yeah, this was right around the same time for me. And then the marriage equality cases, of course, that I was referencing were a decade later.
No, thanks a lot. At the moment, especially in the United States, we are facing a situation where there's real backlash from the conservative community. We're seeing drag bans being installed in the first few states now that will make lives for drag artists, but also for trans folk extremely harder. So I think, well, the way maybe 20 years ago we looked at the future might not be the same way that younger people are now looking at the developments, also if you look all across the world. So maybe in a few sentences, if you had the possibility to give a message to your own younger self, shamelessly taking reference to RuPaul here, what would that message be, and how would you encourage them? Maybe starting with Abbey.
Oh man, you quote RuPaul and then you ask me to start. That's just mean. You know, again, I think my younger self had a privileged existence, but I think I would have encouraged myself to try to experience more diversity, kind of in the first instance, because that is how you learn. Being exposed to other people, other cultures, is how you develop as, you know, a tolerant and empathetic human. And I was stuck in a bubble. I was really stuck in a bubble until I, you know, by the grace of God and others, was able to leave my small town and go to a very progressive college. So I guess that would be the message to my younger self, is look harder and look sooner for those pockets of people that feel like you're home.
Thank you so much. Marco, what would you say to young Marco?
Well, young Marco feels like a very long time ago now, but I think the biggest thing that I would say to a younger me is, you know, be bold. This thing that you think is shameful and that you need to hide away is actually, you know, it's beautiful and it's part of you. It's who you are, and it's not your weakness. It's actually your greatest strength. You know, it is the thing that will not only help you get ahead in your career, but also make some of the most meaningful relationships and friendships and connections in your life. So be bold, be out there, you know, be out and proud and flamboyant. Don't know if I'm, you know, the sequined trucker cap, short shorts kind of guy, but whatever that means to you, to, you know, being out and being proud, do that, and do it as soon as you can, because, you know, that's the route to happiness, I think.
Amen. And Mikkel, what would you say?
Well, I could talk to young Meg, which was my name while I was transitioning, or to young Maria Clara, which was my name when I was a child and an adolescent. So to all my older selves, I'd say, don't let fear stop you from following your heart. I believe that we all feel that warmth when we think of something that we really want to live. And I felt that a lot when I was growing up, but I had that fear that stopped me. So I'd say, don't let fear stop you. And also strategize. I think that it's really easy to say, oh, follow your heart. And so what? Now what do I do? I think it is important to strategize, especially if you're, for example, living with parents that do not support you or do not support your identity, or if you are in a country that is not so safe for LGBTQ people, it is important to strategize to build a path that you will follow to your freedom, that you will be able to be yourself 100% without having the fear that you will be stopped by someone else. So I'd say that don't let fear stop you, and strategize, build your way and follow your path to freedom.
Thank you so much.
If I can just follow up on that, Malte. You said, I found interesting the way in which you answered the question, because you distinguished between, oh, I could ask Maria Clara or I could ask Meg. So, and it kind of reminded me of one of the questions that I often get myself. So, was it always there? Have you ever, did you know that this was the path that you were going to follow as a child? In my case, the thought was always there. If I would have to talk to myself, I would say, just do it. It's not going away. You know you want it. But has it been any different with you? Do you in retrospect think like it was always there, or was it really a quest to first find yourself and finding out what it exactly was?
It was always there. It was always there. And I remember when I was like 3 years old and I went to sleep asking to God, please God, let me wake up in a boy's body, because I really wanted a more masculine body, and I was 3. So I got really frustrated when I realized that that was not going to happen. My body was going to stay the same. And then a lot of frustration. And I kept that feeling, that wanting inside a box closed really, really tight. And I just had the courage to open that box when I was 20 something. So yeah, it was always there, but it was very, very hard to let that out.
Maybe, thanks for that. Maybe on that occasion, Tess, before we move on into the next area of topics about being in the corporate and law firm space, do you also want to share a few words about your transition and your coming out towards yourself and the world?
As a matter of fact, I would, but that's because my experience, well, I came out in 2015, and, oh, no, 2016, 7 years ago. I just got a reminder on Facebook with the photo of when I changed my name. But it was always there. And as a student, I was not doing drag. I was doing cross-dressing. It was not about the theatrical aspect. I really loved dressing like women, and I also understood why, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. But one of the things that I found really fearful, I was doing very good in law school, and the thought that kept hunting me is, if I come out now, what will this do to my career chances? To the masters I was enrolled in, I was already selected for an internship at some law firm, and I still remember that when I told the study advisor that we actually went to that law firm together, and I was like shaking because I was like, yeah, but they hired a man, and now they're going to get like, yeah, a woman, and I really want to start this transition. And much to my surprise, they were actually very open about it. It was very well received. It was also one of the first Dutch firms where they actually did a segment on D&I as a very central part of the onboarding process. And through the months that I've been there, I was very well supported. Then I started working at the Brouw as a legal assistant for most part of my transition, while at the same time studying. And I was actually surprised by how accepted it was, and that they also could jump on the bandwagon for other kinds of events. And that was the moment when I thought, okay, why have I been this fearful all the time? And that I really started embracing it more as a strength than as a weakness or something that should be kept under the table. I think it's there really where I made the point. But one of the things I did not have for a long time were role models. Because especially for transgender people, I was told when I was younger, if you come out, you may as well, if you have a family, well, you may want to get divorced, or your partner may want to get divorced, and if you have children, better say goodbye to them, especially if you move to a new town and you tell nobody about your history. And I think that has really changed, but it also affects, for me, how many role models there are available. In the LGB, I could certainly find them, but in the T, it was extremely difficult. So one of the things that I would like to speak about in the next segment is the role of the LGBT network, because I think this is also something that really helped all of us. But what about you, Malte?
Yeah, honestly, a bit like with Marco, I've been extremely lucky. My parents have been very liberal, and it wasn't a big issue. Through my law studies, I have always been out. The fact that I'm a horribly, annoyingly positive and loud person, definitely, I think I fit also the traditional definition of gay, meaning very happy, very loud. So I've never allowed this to be an obstacle for me. I've been rather loud about that. And I think to some degree, like you, Tess, I've every now and then thought about like, what does it do with my career? Do I have to present as like this more serious person? Especially also when I was in the Vis Moot 15 years back, I was like, okay, can I wear this T-shirt in the evening now to these receptions, or is it too rainbowy? And over time, I realized that like the more you just are yourself, the more it's also possible to melt everything into one person. Because what I felt, what I did for some time, especially in my legal studies, was there's private Malte, and he's flamboyant AF, etc., and has all these attitudes. But then I was trying to somehow build up this lawyer professional Malte, who's great at law, but doesn't have an own personality because he only does law and he's German. And like the more I went on in my career, and the more positive experiences I made, honestly, the more I managed to merge this into one personality that does great at law, but also always have confetti somewhere in their drawer. And I've realized that in the corporate business, at least where I've been working, this was very much appreciated over time.
So let's then move on to the second segment. One of the things that we wanted to discuss really is the being in the corporate law firm, so being in the workplace. And well, I think we've discussed most the experiences in coming in and being out, but taking more specifically to diversity networks, what do they mean to you? What have they done for you? What have you done for them? Can you tell us a bit about it? Abbey, we already mentioned it briefly in the introduction. Gibson Dunn has one.
Yeah, we do. So we have, LGBT affinity groups kind of throughout the firm and at the offices. We have a global diversity committee, which I'm a part of, which meets on kind of all of the different diversity spectrums. Of course, there's a lot of synergies in our community with other diverse communities. Probably the thing that I'm most proud of at the firm is building an LGBT women, and now we consider ourselves LGBT women and non-binary community of lawyers. And this came about because when I started in 2009, there were a lot of gay men. I don't know if you've had this experience, maybe it's a California or a US thing, but I would go to these gay events and 90%, right, gay men, not a lesbian to be seen. I would find them, we would hang out in the corner. And that was the experience at the firm a little bit. And so I said to the firm, I'm the only one. I want to build this community. This is an important group that needs to be able to get together. And although I was the only one, I had supporters across the firm, straight allies and gay men acting as allies as well. And they said, yes, this is important. How can we help you? I'm pretty proud to say that now at Gibson, our number of gay women is higher than our number of gay men. And we are, finally getting some folks who identify as non-binary as well. So I think finding, what is it within the group that is really necessary and important. And one example here, and this is not certainly exclusive to gay women, but last year we had 2 of our women, both of their wives were pregnant at the same time. And they were navigating what that looked like, both in terms of being an associate and also in terms of some of our benefit structures. Some of the forms were a bit antiquated and had, gendered rules on them. And so they were able to really come together and support one another because of their connection through the affinity group, but also help move the firm the next step in the right direction. So it's been a really cool group. I'm actually going to New York next week, and I'll be meeting with our LGBT women and non-binary group for dinner. And we do that across the firm when any of us are in kind of our other offices, just so we can support the person who's alone in Dallas, right? Support the person that's alone in Houston who's having a slightly different experience than those of us who are thriving in the gay meccas here in California.
And given the fact that you call it an LGBT affinity group, I assume that it's not only open to LGBT people?
Yeah, we try to do both, because there is, I think, an importance of having that space where it is just those people that have had that experience. But we let allies come along, certainly, if they're interested. And there's a lot of folks that have, children or sisters and brothers that fit into this community that also feel an affinity for our community, and we try to create a space there for them to interact as well, while still protecting kind of as sacred a place where people just identifying as part of the group can also meet.
That is super interesting, because when I was back at Latham, we were also always thinking within the diversity groups as to what kind of events do we want to have as exclusive closed shop for just the people who are members of that group, and what events do we want to open up? I think it's always a fine line to draw. But of course, always when you talk about the real problematic issues, where people are still facing discrimination, it's always a bit of preaching to the choir if you don't open these up, because everybody in the room will probably be in agreement that there's much to be done. The problem, of course, is the moment you open these up, you will have some people not see themselves in a position to speak up as they would do unless you were closed. Maybe this is a question I would like to ask Mikkel, as like the professional when it comes to implementing such mechanisms and groups at law firms. How do you, at maybe two parts, what did you see when you were yourself at Big Law, and what made your job transition then to finding out, okay, there's a lot to be done, let me become a consultant and help law firms implement systems that really help their employees?
I like to comment that I actually wore a suit and a tie to the Brazilian arbitration moot when I was still a woman. So there is room for gender rebellion within the moots, but it was challenging and I haven't saw anyone else doing that. So about the question now, I believe that diversity and inclusion groups, especially within law firms, are very fundamental. And it was inside groups like that that I finally found some role models and learned how to build my confidence as an LGBTQ person in a corporate environment, because especially being non-binary, and I'm really glad that Abbey said that her group now also brings in people that identify as non-binary, because we usually get forgotten. It's like, okay, the men, the women, and in which group do we fit in? So it's really important. And non-binary people usually feel more included in feminine groups, because we have like the common fight against the patriarchy and stuff like that. But I believe that not only it was important for me to have those groups to build my confidence, but also to bring those discussions such as the benefits for parents. And also, I believe that discussions regarding androgyny often we are able to have those discussions inside those diversity and inclusion groups, and to bring those discussions outside of those groups is a challenge. I believe that especially within the corporate environment, androgyny is still perceived as a trace of informality rather than just another characteristic. It's like you have a point of androgyny, and if you are more androgynous than that, then you start to be perceived as informal. And I believe that diversity and inclusion groups have work to do inside those environments in order to actually bring people past those thoughts and to actually make androgyny a part of the day-to-day routine of those law firms. And talking about my work, I believe that I felt the need to help those environments that are still very stiff, very conservative, in order to help them understand, especially that gender nonconformity and nonconformative sexualities, we are people with those characteristics. We are actually bringing something more to the table. We're bringing more creativity, we're bringing more authenticity, but many times the law firms, they think, oh, it will be too much work to include those people because we have so much patterns and so much norms. So I actually fell in love with the work of building those paths and showing that it's not that hard. It's just about humanity, empathy, and building the right paths. We can use those groups and other actions within the law firms to actually make those places more diverse and inclusive. So I think that's why I changed paths from arbitration to actually work as a diversity and inclusion consultant, and especially to work within the law firms, helping them.
Thank you very much, Mikkel. That's really interesting experience. What I was wondering about is what I'm used to from the Netherlands is, on the one hand, there always was an internal network within the firm, but what they did at a certain point in the Netherlands, probably because everything is quite close together, they also made, they integrated it into a larger network called Forward, which is also organizing events basically for everyone to attend, but of course, specifically with an eye towards LGBT people. Of course, Brazil is a big country, but would you see anything like that perhaps also happening there, being feasible there?
Yeah, I actually forgot to comment on this topic specifically, and I believe that it is important for us to have specific groups for LGBTQ people, and I don't believe that those groups must have only LGBTQ people, because many times someone that initially does not identify themselves as LGBTQ, they might come out, they might find themselves as being part of that community. So I don't believe that identifying with one of the letters must be something that someone has to participate in those groups. But I do believe that it is important to have safe places for those groups. If the LGBTQ population inside that firm wants to reunite only themselves, I think it is important to provide that space. But the law firms and the corporate environments in general, they have the mission to bring together different groups, not only LGBTQ people, but Black people, people with disabilities, all kinds of diversity, and to merge those topics, to merge those fights within an effort that is continuous and that makes sense to the whole firm. So I think that finishes my answer.
Perhaps taking the topic back to the corporate side. Marco, how does this work in Herbert Smith Freehills?
Thanks, Tess. So yeah, we have what we call the IRIS network, which stands for inclusion, respecting identity and sexuality. That was initially the acronym, but it's grown to so much more than that. And it is obviously a home for LGBT plus people within the firm, but is also open to allies. And we really make it a point to try and open as many of our events as possible to allies within the firm. We had a big push shortly after the network was launched in 2016 to get people identifying openly as allies. And I was really shocked to see, maybe it's bad to say shocked, but I was shocked to see, some of the very conservative senior old white male partners really coming out and being hugely supportive of the LGBT community within the firm. And I think one of the most important roles that it plays is recognizing that we are a firm with a network across the world, including offices in jurisdictions where it is not okay to be out and to be yourself. And reassuring people working in those offices and in those markets and with clients in those places that the firm stands behind them and recognizes and celebrates the contribution that they bring. So we did a panel event recently with activists in the Middle East, mainly based in Lebanon, talking about their experience there. And as much as we love our events to be hopeful and inclusive events, this was a really sobering reminder of the difficulties that people in that part of the world face and the fact that they have to hide who they are, often under pain of death, day by day. And so it's really important, I think, from that perspective of highlighting not only the positive sides of being able to be out and proud at work, but also some of the negative and more difficult things that other people in the network face. It's also a really great sort of outward facing tool We use it a lot to connect with clients and with other firms and businesses in the UK. So within London, there's a big sort of group of, it's called interlaw, but they have interbanking and other industries as well, where law firms, accountants, various businesses, will just do a drinks thing, come together, and you just get to meet LGBT people from other firms, which is really great for building a network and a community in a big and established market like London.
Thank you so much for sharing, Marco. We have a question from the audience I'd like to put out here. Olga, identifying as a white, straight, privileged woman who hopes to see herself as a supporter of the LGBTQIA+ community, would like to know from us and you what straight people can do in the arbitration community to be of support, and that would be beyond changing the profile picture to the rainbow one in June. Who would like to take that? Then it's going to be Abbey.
Oh man, but I saw Marco unmute himself, so I think Marco has something to share. I don't want to jump on you, Marco.
I was going to jump in, Abbey, but I can go after you. I mean, I was just a very short and I think hopefully clear point, which is to call out any sort of discrimination or disparagement when you see it. I think the worst thing that can happen is, I have unfortunately had situations where that has happened in, say, a meeting or something, and somebody has come to me afterwards and said, oh, I thought what they said was really bad. I'm so sorry about that. And, my initial response is just, well, that's kind of useless to me. You've got to speak up and say it then and there. So the one thing I would say is, the best thing you can do is speak out when you see any sort of discrimination like that.
Yeah, I would amplify that and add two things. One, I remember when I was a junior associate, we had just gotten this big new case. It was for an oil tycoon, in a southern state in the United States. I perceived to be conservative. I was working with two partners I didn't know well, but they were both straight white men. They were both ex-military. So I had my own preconceived notions of what they would be thinking about me. And we were asked to go to dinner with this new client and his wife. And this is the one time in my career where I kind of pulled back, and I went to these partners and I said, look, I know this is a new client and this is important to you. We'd all been invited to bring our significant others. And I said, I don't have to bring my girlfriend if that's going to be an issue for you. And both of them looked at me and they said, listen, if it's an issue for our client, then expletive the client, right? So they had my back 100%. And what I think that story illustrated to me was that as an ally, you need to be visible, because I didn't know that about them. I made assumptions and that's on me, right? That is my fault. But if there is a way to become visible, I agree, you just don't put up the rainbow flag during Pride, but somehow signaling that you're an ally. Maybe it's putting your pronouns in your signature block. Even if your pronouns subscribe precisely to kind of how you present visually, because that's sending a signal to someone else that talking about pronouns and being upfront about your pronouns is a good thing. The other thing that I would say is that it's important to make sure that LGBTQ+ people have kind of ownership and authorship over some of our responses to things. So one more example, just last year, I was copied inadvertently, I think it might have been purposeful, on an email from opposing counsel making a gay joke about me. He copied, the entire co-counsel team, including a couple, again, straight white male partners that I was working with at the time. And they were furious. And they were ready to, take his head off. They were ready to go to the judge and say that this was discrimination. But what they did instead of doing that was they came to me and they said, we will set this guy's house on fire. What do you want us to do? Right. And I thought that was the response that I wanted in that moment, because it gave me authority and authorship over how I wanted to proceed with that guy. And frankly, I didn't spend more than 5 seconds thinking about that guy for the rest of my life, right? And that is how I wanted to respond. He's a loser. he's obviously in the wrong. I didn't want to burn his house down because I didn't want to think about it anymore. And they gave me the support and the backing to do whatever I wanted, but they allowed me to make that decision. That makes sense.
I would just add, since in arbitration, we talk a lot about networking and the people that we choose to work with. I'd say as a straight person, you can choose diverse people to work with. You can appoint diverse arbitrators. So you can open space for diverse people to be around you whenever you're working inside arbitration teams or proceedings or hearings. And also, I would say, naturalize the existence of LGBTQ people. Don't make comments like that. Do not make jokes. Do not give eye contact that is not necessary. Those like invading eyes, those looks, they really hurt us. So try to naturalize our existences as much as possible, just as any other human, just with a little bit of flamboyant characteristics.
Thanks so much. There was a lot in there. Thanks to all of you. We have one more question from the audience that actually fits in here really well, and that I've honestly never thought about, but it's a really good thought. And I would like to push this one once more to Mikkel, I think, because Anna is asking, she's curious how various gender parity initiatives in arbitration stand to the LGBTQIA+ community, especially when we talk about trans and non-binary folk. There's of course a certain goal conflict between getting gender parity and then talking about the broader spectrum of diverse people. So as the diversity and inclusion expert, how do we solve this?
Well, I believe that all diversity efforts help in a way, and I believe that the gender inclusion, the gender equity part, especially the binary part between men and women, is very important also. I am not a non-binary person that believes that someday we'll get rid of the gender binary. I do not believe that. I believe that binary people will always exist, and I think that they need to get along as well. And also LGBT women and people that identify as gender diverse also tend to be encompassed, also tend to be part of the population that benefits from those kind of policies. So when you say, oh, let's include more women, let's try to bring more gender equality, I believe that that is also beneficial to all kinds of other groups. We just have to also specify when needed the special fights that each group have. So just as we're doing here, we're talking about the particularities of the LGBTQ community, but I do believe that all diversity and inclusion efforts regarding women, regarding people of color, regarding people of disabilities, they all come to a bigger end, which is inclusion of every kind of human being, regardless of how they are, how they live. So I believe that those initiatives help. We just cannot rely only on them. We need to also create groups, create discussions, events just like this to bring up more specific topics to the LGBTQ community and other communities as well.
I would also like to add my 2 cents to that as well, given that within the Max Planck Institute Luxembourg, I was asked to also look into the gender equality program. And the more I think about it, I saw the question, it says gender parity, but the thing that we are looking for is gender equality. But actually, we can just do away with the gender and we should get to equality, because it's about so much more than just getting a balance between men and women. It's also about what rights do you have if you are the male parent in a heterosexual relation? Do you have the same rights to be with your child as your female partner would have, or a female colleague that would be giving birth to a child? It's the one does not necessarily exclude the other. And also given that in terms of how many people, what percentage is actually in the side of the T or non-binary or gender diverse, it's only a small group. But that's sort of also exactly the reason why I think we shouldn't start working with percentages saying, for example, that every company board should have at least one gender diverse person. It doesn't work that way. What you can look at is whether everyone gets the same pay and has the same career opportunities. That's a wholly different question, and that actually affects everyone.
Yeah, that's a very good thought. More focusing on the process and on eligibility and empowering than on actual numbers and categories that are too strict. We have two more questions that I think fit well here before we move on to further topics. So I'd like to read them out. First one is for Marco. In your introduction, it was mentioned that you worked in West Asia as well. Our question asker is only a fresh graduate, but when they try charting their career trajectory, they're asking themselves for opportunities, positions in such less than progressive countries. What are your thoughts and guidances?
Well, I worked in East Asia, in the Far East, in Hong Kong. And amongst Asian jurisdictions, Hong Kong, I suppose, is more liberal and open than some others, in the sense that it is not actively criminal to be LGBT, but Hong Kong still doesn't recognize same-sex marriages, for example. So not really the easiest place. But I do work with clients from all over the world, and I have definitely found myself having to moderate how I present outwardly to some clients. It's not great, but you take a view as to ultimately what makes you feel most comfortable. And so I'd say if you are looking at positions in those jurisdictions, first and foremost, be safe. Take care of yourself. We have the great privilege of the people on this panel being in jurisdictions that are welcoming and accepting, but that unfortunately is not the experience for many, possibly most people out there. So don't take that for granted. But I would say also, look for and try and align yourself with firms or organizations who do create that space for LGBT people. Most firms now will publicize that their initiatives in that regard, and you should look out for that, because as I think Abbey said, you make those communities around you, and I think your professional career can be a really good source of finding that community, but just take care of yourself first and foremost.
Thanks, Marco. We have one more question that is particularly for Mikkel and Tess, and I have been asking myself this question, and I've been thinking over that and been active in that area. So I think it's an extremely important issue, and that is, how can LGBs help and support their genderqueer T-folk? Because what often get lost is that even within the LGBTQ community, intersectionalities apply, and some groups face more marginalization than others. As Tess said herself, she saw several LGBs, but not so many Ts. Before giving this question to Mikkel and Tess, I would like to share that even in Germany, we are seeing this at the moment at an extreme volume, to be honest, that we are currently discussing a law that would make it easier in Germany for trans folk to change their name, change their gender identity as their legal status. And many people who identify as feminists, but also gay men, cis white gay men, come out publicly on Twitter, on LinkedIn, arguing against these rights for T people and for trans people. And honestly, what it to a certain degree always feels like, especially coming from the LG and B community, is a bit of complacency, because we are now at a stage where kind of our rights are somehow at a level where we feel we can compare with straight people, and we are almost there. It's accepted that we exist and we don't need to fear anymore. And now everybody who comes after us, it's a bit like, come on, guys. It's gotta be enough at some point. And I feel this is terrible, and I would also like to hear what we can do to overshadow these hopefully only few minor people within our own community who are outspeaking in that direction.
And there's actually another question raised in the chat, which says the panel has already briefly touched upon dominance of gay cis men and LGBTQIA groups, especially in the legal industry. What can gay cis men specifically do to be or become part of the groups without reinforcing the lack of diversity between LGBTQI spaces? I think we can just as well take them together, Mikkel. You
Yeah.
go first.
Take the lead, please.
Well, in any case, because we have a similar discussion in the Netherlands also with regard to the ease of changing one's name. And one of the things that I repeatedly point out to people is that up until 2014 in the Netherlands, you had to be permanently sterilized to get your name changed, to get your gender changed. Let that sink in. Permanently and irreversibly infertile. Doesn't matter in what direction you're going. If you want to change your legal gender, not even physically, you have to either change your legal gender physically or make sure that you're infertile in some other way, because that was the requirement under the previous law. This whole move towards self-identification is a step that has already been taken in a lot of countries and is being taken in more and more countries, and is also intended to ease the burden on transgender people of going through, on the one hand, a dehumanizing process, on the other hand, to not have to wait while your outward gender is changing, while you still have to wait for your legal gender. It makes things easier. Now, in any case, with that kind of discussion, please take the side of the transgender people, and please realize that it's not about transgender females going into women's clothing rooms, except for anything other than to do what it is for, to change clothes. Then with respect to inside the firm, I mean, most important thing is at least show some compassion, some understanding, even if they are not. Changing your gender is a different process than coming out as gay, but that doesn't mean that you are not faced with similar stigmas. And that's the whole, I think that's also where the question about intersectionality goes to. You have to be aware that there are certain issues that affect all of us, including in terms of race, including in terms of age, including in terms of gender, including in terms of sexuality. And the challenge is at first to see where they all interrelate, but once you have the realization that they do actually interrelate, then you can also be an ally in combating them. Finally, with regard to the lack of diversity, that I don't really, with respect to the dominance of gay cis or the gay cis white men, that I don't know how to solve. In any case, have more people from other groups come to the networking events. But this is also something that I've been wondering about myself a lot too. Like, why is it mainly the gay men that get to this type of events? And I think we should turn to Abbey after this to figure out how she did it. Mikkel.
Perfect. I would just like to add some things to what Tess said, which she said beautifully, but I believe that when it comes to understanding trans people, the first thing is like study. It might seem simple, but you can follow people that produce content about being trans. You can look on YouTube, you can look on the internet. It's the amount of information that actual trans people are providing you to study about our experiences is free, and it's up to you to just search for it and just, oh, okay, so that's the non-binary means that, transgender means that, there is a difference, there is not. So try to understand for yourself, because I believe that trans people are often put in a place of permanent teachers, and it is exhausting to be always explaining, especially being a non-binary person. A lot of people still don't get it, and many times you won't get it just by Googling it once. But I think that an active effort of studying trans and non-binary experiences will do you good when you try to understand us more. And in that sense, I would also encourage okay, do not look for trans and non-binary people that you don't have anything in common with, but look for trans and non-binary people that you have things in common and try to actually become friends, because nothing is the same as having a transgender friend or a non-binary friend that you live with, that you see their struggles in a day-to-day routine. It's something that the internet will not be able to provide you. And also support our rights. When you study our experiences, when you start living with trans and non-binary people, you will understand much more why our rights are so important and why there are so many of us with very few rights to live like they want to, depending on the country they are in. So it's very important to cis and straight people to understand why our rights are so fundamental to our community, and just by studying and living with us, you will get that there. But specifically regarding to cis men, I think that testosterone made me understand cis men a little bit more, so I can talk to them a little bit more directly. Like, know your privileges. First of all, know your privileges, okay? You live in a sexist world, in a world that being masculine gives you privileges, gives you more voice, people listen to you more, people actually respect you more. So if you have masculine, a nature of a masculine appearance, you can actually use that to open doors for people that don't have those privileges. So actively open doors and like, oh, so do you want someone to speak at that event? Let me introduce you my non-binary friend, they're here. Oh, do you need someone to fill up that the work appointment? Let me introduce you my trans friend. You can actually open those doors for yourself to help us get into environments that are masculine and dominantly masculine. So think of that. And also just finish up to cis men, control your urges, because I know that testosterone a lot of times is a difficult hormone, and I know that feminine people have hormones that are very difficult as well, but nowadays I get a little bit more how testosterone works. And I think that when you're up to a point where you don't know if you might disrespect someone or not, control yourself. Take a step back, think about it. Do not act on impulse, because you might hurt someone, you might oppress someone. So think about that.
One thing that popped into my mind, by the way, Mikkel, and I'm also curious for how you think about it briefly. There are also trans people who don't want to, who are not out as trans, for example, because they transitioned 7 years ago. They completed it, they left it behind them, and they are not going to identify as trans. You and I are very open about this, but this is certainly not the case for everyone. And some people just want to be left alone. And I think it actually goes both ways, in the sense of, on the one hand, there are indeed the individuals that want to be left alone, and you should respect that. On the other hand, you should also respect people who present more as gender diverse and try to find their own way of doing things. And if people are happy to talk about it, just ask them. But if people don't, leave them.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. We're not permanent teachers for everyone. We tend to act as teachers to the ones that we're more closer to. And I do believe that many people do not want to talk about being trans all the time or none of the time. So I think that it is also about knowing everyone's limits and dialogue. It's very important to talk about things before you do them. So, oh, I think that someone is trans. I'm not going to tell my friends that I met someone that is trans if that person does not tell me openly that they identify as trans. I cannot presume that they're trans. I think that it's really important to stress out that as well. Thank you, Tess.
Thank you so much. Both, that was extremely insightful. I think this don't imply and ask for consent, honestly, applies for all of the diversity community, but it's definitely the most pressing issue for the trans folks. But I think we see similar things also as gay and lesbian cis people, where people would just assume, put us into certain boxes, and sometimes it's okay, depending on how close that person is to you, and how well they know you. And also, I think sometimes to a certain degree, whether they are also from that same category of people. But there's some kind of jokes and remarks that only the inside should do. At least not if the person you're talking about is not your closest friend from dating years back. I would like to do a bit of a circle back into the legal sphere, and what I would be interested to hear, especially from Abbey and Marco, as people who litigate and arbitrate in front of panels and courts, is whether, and maybe that's not the case, but I would be interested to hear that, whether being a member of the minority, of the LGBTQ community, actually has an impact and an effect on how you think and argue as a disputes lawyer, and how you shape your arguments and how you appear in court. Sorry, Abbey, please.
All right, I was going to defer to Marco. So I think for me, it impacts a couple of things. One is my physical presentation. So I am proudly say that I look very gay. Sometimes, depending on the jurisdiction that I'm arguing in, I try to look a little less gay. You know, that is, in my mind, not hiding a part of me, but it's trying to be respectful to the moment, right? I have an obligation to my client to get the best result for that client, period, hard stop. And so if that means that I do my hair a little bit differently, wear a slightly different outfit, like that is not my moment to push my agenda of equality. That doesn't mean that I'm going to accept blatant discrimination, but it's almost a recognition of the tribunal, right? And trying to be persuasive there. I think the other thing, and I imagine a lot of us feel this way, which is I take the community on my back a little bit, right? When I go places, and I know that I am the first person that maybe the judge is interacting with that is so openly and obviously gay. And because of that, I want to be even better. I want to be even more likable. And so it's like an additional level of I'm advocating not only for my client, but I want to make sure that I'm a good representative of this community everywhere I go. And so it's an additional level of pressure. And I'd be curious if other people feel that as well, or if this is something I'm putting on myself.
I mean, I would echo that, Abbey. You know, certainly in terms of picking how best to present to a tribunal or a panel based on you know, their backgrounds. You know, it's no different to reading them in different ways, and, you know, understanding their professional backgrounds and presenting your case in a similar way. As you say, you have you know, an obligation to your client to deliver the best result. The other thing that I would say is one thing that I've learned is that the practice of law is so much, in fact, so much so, I'd say, centrally about human relationships. You know, it's about, if you're developing a practice, it's about developing a rapport with your clients. And sometimes the way to do that is to show your full self. And actually, the last two big cases I've done, the instructing client, GC at a major multinational corporation in Asia and an oil company in the US, were both openly out gay men, and we sort of bonded over that. You know, we had chats about our coming out stories and gay nephews or nieces. And so it's a really great way to actually build rapport. And it also feeds into how you deal with the other side. You know, if you're cross-examining a witness, you've got to be, empathy is a really important part of being an effective advocate and lawyer. And I think it was Abbey, when you said earlier, you know, the advice to your former self is sort of broaden that circle. It very much feeds into the same thing. You know, if you have that experience behind you, I think you can be more empathetic to the experience of others. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
What about you, Malte? Because you didn't always work as a litigation financer.
Oh, that's true. I think when I was a disputes attorney at Latham, certainly, I fully echo what Marco and Abbey said. Another angle for me is that as a member of a minority that has always had to fight for their rights and for their human rights, I think this influences the way I interpret statutes. I look at society. I think Marco said it. Disputes and law is about relationships between people. In the end of the day, law is made up rules that smart people made up and that we interpret. It's nothing real, and we need to somehow sometimes remind ourselves, right? It's rules that people made up to make it easier for people to live with people, be it securities law, be it fundamental human rights. But in the end of the day, all that only works because we all somehow believe in it. And in that, I think you can have, regardless of day politics, you can have different ways how you approach the interpretation of statutes and how you argue. And for me, I have always felt that like this civil right and human rights component and the high notion of the right to express oneself is always something that kind of, I even managed to build that into my PhD thesis, and it's about boring dull securities law. So somehow there's always, I think, an angle in how you argue where you can either be a bit more on the conservative or on the liberal side. And of course, as a litigator and arbitrator, I would always put the client's interest first and at center because that's your job. But then you can also, maybe I have more of an access to also make it a constitutional argument, what I just want to do, because I keep thinking about these civil rights issues in my head. So I think that's something I think that strongly influences me. And now as a funder, I prefer to pick cases that have these angles and where we can actually help people. So yeah, that still has an impact on how I work, because if your case is really about civil rights and about doing something good, then I'll be sure to short track it. Yeah.
Perhaps to add a small piece for myself, because I only worked for a law firm as a student assistant. After that, I went into teaching, but I never hit my trans identity, also because I felt it was important for there to be role models in university education. I knew professors who were gay, but I didn't meet a single one, at least not as far as I was aware, that was trans. And I think not just having, if I would just have had that experience and see that this would actually be no barrier to have a successful legal career, that this might have accelerated things a bit. I'm not saying that everything would have been different, but I think it also, once you see more people ending up in higher roles in society, at places where you thought were excluded for people that have the same orientation as you do, yeah, it's important to always keep that in mind. So I kind of share what Abbey said in there with respect to, you always carry the community on your back. I think for Mikkel, you kind of have the same thing. You kind of became the community, or at least its preacher.
I was going to say that, Tess, we actually are the role models that we needed a few years ago. And I believe that it is very important to have people talking about being LGBTQ and transgender specifically in arbitration, just so that we know, okay, it's possible. People do live and work with that and they are happy. And I think that I just wanted to add, relating to the practice and of law and such, just to everyone that already said things that I agree with, but I believe that being LGBTQ gave me a broader perspective of life, kind of like what Malte and Marco said, and also a lot more empathy. And I do believe that when we're talking to other people, when we're trying to get to agreements, it's really important for us to actually understand and try to understand better what other people are thinking. And once I became transgender, I believe that I had no choice but to try to understand other people like me, and that made me understand all kinds of humans a lot more.
It kind of reminds me of what a friend of mine said last week: after you've transitioned, nothing can really get you down anymore. Yeah, you've already been to the worst possible thing you think you may have had for your entire life.
Exactly, I agree.
Then you can even manage a career in arbitration. Time flies, and that's why we need to move on to our last topic that we wanted to address a little bit, because we only have 10 minutes left on the scheduled time, and that is indeed the connection of living a life in the disputes resolution and arbitration community while still also being a human being. We all have been in amazing and reputable institutions that serve their clients and that solve disputes. And we all know that in each of these jobs, you are required to do a lot of work because clients pay good money for our services. So on a bit of a personal level, what do you identify as your family, whether it's chosen or biological, and what your situation there is? And how do you align this with the demands that a career in arbitration or disputes does put up as a challenge to you? And how do you balance that out? And do you think are there particular being LGBTQ issues to that, or is it the struggle that everyone's facing to just not explode? Any takers? Marco.
Well, so I don't have kids at the moment, but I want kids, and I'm very clear that when I do get there, I want to adopt kids. And so a really important part of me choosing to continue this job and to get ahead and continue in my career with this firm is the support that the firm is willing to offer me on that journey. And we're very lucky within this firm that the shared parental leave policies apply equally to same-sex couples and are not gendered. And so that at least opens up the possibility in principle that when it comes time for me to adopt, I will have the support in the space to do that. Having said that, I have seen the ways that this profession can insidiously discriminate against people with kids or without, or along gendered lines, and that still happens even in a progressive, forward-thinking law firm. So I have seen with my cisgendered colleagues how the burden of that falls more heavily on women, and senior, talented female lawyers are leaving the profession much faster than their male colleagues. It's not right. It's got to be dealt with, and it is, as I say, insidious. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know whether the structure of this profession is such that it is incompatible with two people having high-flying careers and having kids, or what the change is that needs to happen. But it is a massive problem. It still happens, and I don't think any amount of policy writing gets rid of it. It's an innate cultural change that has got to happen, I think.
Abbey, maybe you as a partner at Gibson, definitely one of the most reputable international firms. What do you do at Gibson to help women or people with family who decide for children break the glass ceiling and make partner?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think as the LGBT community in particular, our definition of family can be different. If I could show you my lap and what I'm looking at to the left, it's 2 dogs. Those are my family members. Those are my children. And I try to take the lesson of being gay and apply that to how I treat my associates when they say they need time off or they need to step back. That might be because they're having a kid. That might be because they're tending to a family member. That might be because in my case, a Chinese family kind of adopted me after my parents passed away out here in California. And it might be because I need to go and do something with them, right? I don't have a biological connection. And I think that's more common in our community. So I think the first thing that I try to do is to meet people where they're at. For some people, mental health means watching RuPaul's Drag Race once a week. And I need to give them that hour, right? And I don't frankly need them to tell me if they're going to be watching RuPaul's Drag Race or if they're going to be going to their child's soccer game. I mean, I totally agree with Marco that there is discrimination, and it does fall on the back of women primarily in child rearing. But I guess I try to divorce what is the ask that the person is making of me, and just say, if you need that hour, if you need that day, if you need that 6 months, I'm going to respect that, because I don't purport to know what it is you are going through. I don't purport to be in your shoes. All I try to do is empathize with you and give you the time and the space that you need to take care of whatever you need to do in whatever context that arises. And I think for me, that comes from a mental health perspective as well. You know, taking space and establishing work-life balance is just very, very different for every single person. And I think that's the call of your question, right? What is the family that we as LGBT people have? It's very, very different, especially in our community, I think, from person to person. And so I guess that would be the value that I try to live, and the suggestion that I would make to others, which is meet people where they're at without asking you know, too many questions, and just validating what it is that they need, that they are telling you that they need.
Oh, if only all law firm partners were like that. Mikkel, I'm assuming you wouldn't have any extra work with Abbey to get done. But yeah, what is your family situation, and what would you, from your professional consulting job, say what law firms can do on that end to be even better? Those that are not at Abbey's level yet.
Well, as I said before, I do believe that LGBTQ people tend to always have to explain how we live our lives to others. And that is the case with my family. They already get that I am trans, okay, that part they got it, but the non-binary part is still very iffy, very difficult. So I believe that with regards to my family, and I think that many people will identify with that, it's about step by step, day by day. I think that building a world that is more inclusive to our nature is not something that will be done overnight. Big changes take time, and I learned that with my transition, and I take that nowadays to my practice. And I believe that my work with diversity and inclusion kind of translates also with my work with my family. I'm kind of being their consultant and trying to help them understand our world in order for them to live with me in a simpler way. But I do believe that nowadays, living a nomad life, I'm not always in the same place, and I have family from different cities. One thing that I try to always do to balance work life and my personal life is to be as present as possible in the moment, wherever I am in that moment. So if now I'm visiting a friend, I'll try to be as present as possible there and not have my mind wondering where's my mom at. So I think that this kind of helps me not be anxious all of the time, thinking about, oh my God, how is everyone? How's everyone doing? So I believe that living in the present is very important. And I believe that we all have a part in building the future that we want for us and for everyone else. So I think that not only for my family, but also for my work and my life in general, that is the lesson that I try to wake up in the morning and think about it. It's step by step, day by day. We will not make the world a better place overnight. It's a continuous effort. So let's get to it.
Thank you, Mikkel. Tess, do you want to share a few words? And we are running towards deadline, but we also have one further question from the audience that I would definitely like to answer. Maybe a few words from your side, and then we'll do that last question, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, maybe one short observation. Ultimately, I do have a child wish. I'm also quite explicit about it. I don't know yet whether I'll be with a male or female or gender diverse partner ultimately. But this is, I think, also one of the reasons why I'm starting more and more to focus on what is actually the parental policy here, or whatever place that I work in, also helping ensure that it's equal. So when the moment comes whatever the configuration will be, that I'm at least not worse off than my cis hetero colleagues. And that's, I mean, at first I thought it was about making sure that you have acceptance, but once you get to acceptance, there's a whole new range of issues opening up, going into the direction of equality. So in that respect, the fight never stops. But on the other hand, if you start addressing it, you may actually not only help out yourself, but a lot of other people in the end. And that's one of the reasons that makes it worthwhile to keep pushing for it, not just doing it for yourself, but also for the people coming after you, just like the people before you also try to level the path for you, even if they were not always as successful.
That is such a beautiful remark, and I wish we could conclude on this. But no, I actually don't, because I think this last question we have here from the audience is a really interesting one. And I would like to read that out, and that is whether there has ever been a conflict of interest and conflict of values with the client in your professional career. For example, if you have a regular commercial matter and the client is something like a Chick-fil-A, so a company notoriously known for being homophobic and sponsoring to the alt-right. Yeah, anyone had such a situation and dealt with it?
I can name one situation, and of course I won't name the law firm that I was in, but I worked at a law firm, and that the office actually got an offer to help a Brazilian mall. It's a shopping mall that was recently, at that time, they had a scandal because they did not let a transgender woman use the feminine bathroom, and the news kind of exploded in the country, and the law firm that I was at the time got the opportunity to help the shopping mall, but they refused the case because of the conflict of interest, because they would not let the firm get involved in a case with a company like that.
Thank you. Marco, Abbey, luckily never had to work for such companies that were problematic. That is also a positive thing, I would think. So yeah, we are at the end of our scheduled time.
Perhaps one thing I can add, Malte, which I found very funny, because
sure,
I don't even remember exactly what case it was, but there was some form of interest litigation in the Netherlands, also in the gender equality spectrum, and then I was thinking, oh, this is really good, someone is picking that up, and then I was thinking, but who's the lawyer? Oh, it's actually the firm that I used to work for. But they continue to take up pro bono work also for non-binary people. I think this was about the X in the passport for intersex people. But I was just thinking, like, oh, this is actually really great that they do it. I mean, it can also work the other way around, not only in taking homophobic cases, but also actively taking the cases that aim to promote the same kind of values that you're preaching. So not only preaching, actually practicing what you preach.
That's amazing.
And I think with that, we are pretty much out of time.
But thanks for sharing this. I had an amazing time. I would like to thank each and every of our panelists, and you, Tess, for co-hosting with me, and also our very active audience. I think it was beautiful that you put these questions out there and help us steer the discussion in directions that are interesting for you. So we certainly hope there was something in there for you. We definitely had a very good time, and I have a lot of stories to take in, and that I'm grateful for.